everybody. Thanks for listening. I'm Jenny. I'm a life coach, and today I'm talking about fragmentation and soul loss. So, what is fragmentation and soul loss? It's when you go through any kind of trauma, and then a little piece of your personality, your identity kind of breaks off from the main core. And so a lot of empaths are created when, as children, um, we learned that predicting emotions helped us survive, and that our value was in being of service to other more than who we were otherwise. This is one way that fragmentation happens. Soul retrieval involves doing work with your inner child, doing work with your shadow, doing work with your inner teenager, all those parts that experienced trauma or helped you survive or be accepted, and reintegrating them with your core identity. We think of our shadows as bad, but they're not really what's bad about us. They're what's hidden, what's not easy to see, our blind spots. It's the person we'd rather not be, but who is still there inside of us. And again, these parts all helped us survive at some point. It's very easy to get frustrated with ourselves when these personality fragments interfere with our goals. And so it's important to approach them from an accepting place if you want to learn to, work as a team with those parts and start to reintegrate them. So, what are signs that you have some fragmentation or soul loss happening? You feel homesick for a place you've never been. This is also called the yearning by many people in the empath community. You enable toxic people, you allow people to take advantage of you. You might have trouble focusing. You might betray yourself in order to be of service to others. uh, Disillusionment or repeating and doubling down on what's already not working. Um, Hypervigilance, um, not feeling at ease in situations that are outside of our comfort zone to an extreme extent. This can feel like dizziness, fear of crowds, heart pounding, intense social anxiety, emotionally monitoring people, feeling like you are responsible for everyone else's emotions and being hyper vigilant about what those emotions and thoughts of other people might be. Over focusing on appearances, perfectionism, numbing, living from a scarcity mindset, having a need for certainty, too much focus on the past or future, comparing yourself to others, overworking, anxiety, depression, self doubt. The list goes on. Emotional flashbacks are another thing. People are pretty familiar with flashbacks in terms of standard PTSD, but emotional flashbacks are much more subtle and hard to identify. But it's when you can tell that you're triggered and you don't know why. This is an emotional flashback. So there is something that has reminded you of some emotional turmoil in your past, but you're not fully conscious that it's happening or what the trigger was necessarily. This can look like hating certain times of the year and not knowing why, or backsliding certain times of the year and not knowing why, feeling anxious, irritable, moody, or having intense sensations when you experience a less obviously triggering event. What causes soul loss? Emotionally immature parents, anything that was traumatic for a child. This could be bullying, this could be, moving, divorce, neglect. It could be a natural disaster, having to move constantly, anything that was traumatic for a child. Um, Physical, emotional, verbal, all kinds of abuse. When we are consciously or unconsciously told that parts of us are too much or not accepted, or when we are told things that we witnessed did not occur, when someone is denying our reality, when our needs and limits are ignored. Um, when as children, when these things happens, we don't have the awareness that this is not a reflection of who we are. And so we tend to internalize these things as our fault or that we deserve them. Okay. And so, in an attempt to receive love or approval, we deny these parts of ourselves that are not accepted. And we begin to highlight the parts of ourselves that do get approval from our caregivers and from our social circles. Um, if vulnerability was shunned in your home or not embraced, this can cause a great deal of insecurity later on as an adult. Having your reality denied causes a lot of self doubt and confusion of what is real. Um, parent figures directly or indirectly, when parent figures directly or indirectly deny your reality, it causes a huge lack of self trust and also an ability to know whether or not you can trust other people. It can lead to a broken trust meter where you're more likely to trust people like narcissists and things because you taught that you can't trust your own reality, right? So, um, this creates a situation over time where we end up gaslighting ourselves. And children need to be treated with respect in order to develop self respect. Some other causes of soul loss are parentification. This is where a parent treats their child like an adult with adult responsibilities or burdens them with adult problems and adult emotions. Enmeshment or emotional incest. This is where a parent is treating a child like a partner in terms of how they're getting their emotional support met. Okay. So, the effects of all of this, um, first of all, a lot of this is deemed normal in our society because we live in a very sick society. It's normal because it's common. It's normal because it happens more often than it doesn't, but it's not normal because it's healthy. It leads to repression of the true self, unaccepted parts of your personality, and learning that you have to achieve or perform to earn love. It causes us to be out of touch with our own identity, our own likes, our own values, and our own emotions. Um, it leads to codependency, where we feel like we have to rescue other people um, because I think ultimately we wanted someone to rescue us. And because we were abandoned, we do not want to abandon other people. We want to rescue people. But this can cause a problem where you care more about other people's problems than they do. Um, that's basically what codependency is. We over apologize, or we apologize when there's really no reason to apologize. Uh, Emotional monitoring. Um, Also, you become very good at reading people. Um, you can just walk in a room and kind of sense if the vibes are off, right? Over seriousness or lack of play is a pretty common trauma response to fragmentation. People pleasing as a way to maintain control over how we are perceived. It's a way to People pleasing is a way for empaths to attempt to avoid abandonment. Okay. A lack of boundaries, over giving to others because it allows us to feel needed, important, and valuable. Having unrealistic expectations of ourselves and others, which allows us to avoid emotional intimacy, which subconsciously feels unsafe and overwhelming because intimacy was not safe growing up if you have fragmentation and if you have trauma. Magical thinking. Okay. I use a lot of magical thinking in my methods and my videos, right? Shamanism incorporates a lot of magical thinking, but the key is knowing where each foot is. Key is knowing where the line is when you're in magical thinking and when you're in reality. And so fragmentation is where that line kind of blurs and you kind of lose your bearings on what side of that line you're on. Limerence, which is when you think people are your soulmate who aren't your soulmate, um, when you get infatuated with people and you project all these future hopes and expectations onto someone that you really don't know that well. It's like you have an entire relationship with them in your head. You read into all these cues as signs that they love you back when maybe that's not true. So you falling in love with people when it's not reciprocated. Hyper independence, not asking for help, trying to do everything alone. This happens when you didn't have reliable adults to help you work through your emotions and problem solve. This is an adaptation to emotional abandonment. Um, Feeling guilty when you get compliments because you feel like you've deceived them if they think these good things about you. Chameleoning, blending in, the fear of being seen, masking. If you grew up in a chaotic, negative, or dangerous household, this is one of the first things that you learn, is to never show your weaknesses and to blend in and to be as invisible as possible. Manipulation, an attempt to get your needs met and to feel safe. Um, this has a very negative context. Most empaths are not manipulative in the way we think of narcissists to be, but giving because you expect something in return, people pleasing because you're trying to gain acceptance. These are also forms of manipulation. Black and white thinking, which is I always do this or this never happens for me. So really hyperbolic thinking instead of being able to live with the discomfort of gray areas. Little to no memories. If you can't remember that much of your childhood, it means you were probably dissociated, which is when you leave your body, even though you appear physically present. It's a defense mechanism that allows us to stay feeling safe. And difficulty with relationships, trouble finding healthy relationships. Our childhood relationships sets the foundation for our adult relationships. And the primary feeling you had in childhood is often the primary feeling you will seek out in your adult relationships. So if you had bad feelings in childhood, you're probably going to choose relationships where those feelings are re-manifested. When we don't develop in safe relationships, we develop insecure attachment patterns. Relationships feel unsafe and overwhelming. And so we're more likely to end up in toxic relationships because they feel familiar. And things that feel familiar do not stand out as red flags, right? They stand out as feeling like home. Um, so you might also overthink because you were taught to be scared of making mistakes. You might be apathetic, um, which could look like numbness or checking out. You have a perception that the world is dangerous or bad, or that life is meaningless and hopeless. This is called learned helplessness, right? If you grew up feeling like you were always in a double bind, right? You were always in a lose lose situation. And there was nothing you could do. You couldn't be, nice. You couldn't be mean. Nothing worked. Nothing. There was no way to get your needs met. That creates apathy and learned helplessness. An inability to self soothe. When you're having big emotional reactions, you turn to food, alcohol, shopping, or other coping mechanisms instead of being able to allow those uncomfortable emotions to be fully felt and move through you. Self medicating. Cigarettes was one way people self-medicate. Tobacco, in shamanic cultures is used as a medicine, but cigarettes are poisoned tobacco. Okay, self-destruction like binging, purging, drugs are all attempts to heal because metaphorical self-destruction is also a very common experience in the awakening process. Um, and so binging, purging, drugs, all of these things are attempts at a metaphorical dismemberment. And it's also important to note that pain is very often a prerequisite for change. It is fertile ground for for growth, for post-traumatic growth. So um, sometimes self-destruction is an ingredient in reaching the depths of pain that are required to trigger post-traumatic growth. Um, a fear of being happy. This can happen if you had a parent who always yucked your yum or always had something negative to say when you try to share good news. Self sabotage out of fear and an attempt to control the outcome. The thing about self sabotage is that it allows you to predict what is going to happen. And sometimes that is less scary than being blindsided. And so self sabotage can be an attempt to feel safe because you're at least in control of the failure instead of letting it happen to you. Um, our brains and bodies prefer to stay in what is familiar. What is familiar is what feels safest, even if that doesn't make logical sense. Even if we're unhappy or miserable, that feels safer because it's familiar, and we underestimate how scary changes to the nervous system. And self sabotage is a reaction to this fear. And so, if you keep self sabotaging, the important thing is to go really, really, really slow and let your nervous system slowly adjust to change. Denial and defensiveness, which can look like being very reactive, quickly shutting down. It's a state where you believe you must defend yourself from being shamed, rejected, or abandoned. But it can also not. It can also shut down healthy conversations, healthy conflict resolutions, um, and um, so it's a pretty long list, and it's important to remember that none of these things are your fault. They're just important to be aware of. Okay, and there are solutions. Okay, the main solution out of this fragmentation is through fully feeling. Um, Many people don't change because healing is just too painful or too scary. Feeling strong emotions sometimes feels like you're going to die. It's safe to feel emotions. It is safe to feel discomfort, but it doesn't always feel safe. Healing requires desperation and kind of a healthy dose of masochism because healing is painful, right? Not healing is also painful. So it's a choice of which pain do you want to put yourself through. A lot of people who think they want healing really just want validation. But healing is much more confronting than that. Okay. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong, but it does mean that you need to take responsibility for your old patterns and work to replace them. Somewhere in our pasts, empaths chose to respond to pain by internalizing it and blaming ourselves. Narcissists, on the other hand, chose to externalize it and blame everyone else. But as a gift for choosing not to hurt other people, empaths carry their own antidote. Um, the antidote for a snake bite is snake venom, okay? Because by assuming the problem is us, even though it's not, by internalizing, right, we're more likely to seek healing. And healing is where we discover and shed this misplaced blame. So, children of trauma either grow up blaming themselves for everything or blaming everyone else for anything. And empaths usually are blaming themselves for everything. Okay. And so part of healing is discovering and shedding this misplaced blame. The only thing that you're doing wrong is that you're doing nothing wrong. Okay. Is that you? Yeah, that's that you're doing nothing wrong. So healing means making the unconscious conscious. Um, it means learning who you are and unlearning who you are at the same time. If you can observe your thoughts and impulses behind your reactions, and if you can identify the emotions, that's a huge part of this journey. Okay, you've already made incredible progress if you're able to do that. And then if you can find the root, if you know how these patterns started or where they came from, um, another huge jump in progress there. It also means learning to be kind instead of nice. What's the difference? When we're nice, um, we are just trying to seek approval. We're just trying to make everyone else happy. When we're kind, we are able to say no. We are able to honor our own needs and put those needs first. We are able to be um, uncomfortably blunt and honest with people. Okay, being uncomfortably blunt and honest with someone is being kind. Telling someone a white lie just so you don't cause discomfort, that's being nice. And so it's learning to be kind instead of nice, and not being easy to take advantage of anymore. There's something trustworthy about people who don't need to be liked. And kind people are operating from a place of being authentic, and nice people are operating from a place of wanting to be liked. Okay. Logic also doesn't work on trauma. This is why a lot of talk therapy doesn't always work, because um, trauma lives in the right side of the creative side. Talk therapy works more on the logic side of the brain, the left side of the brain. This is why somatic therapy can be really helpful. Internal family systems therapy can be really helpful. Shamanic practices can be really helpful because they're all working with the creative, illogical side of the brain, the side where trauma lives. So if talk therapy doesn't work for you, that could be a really good reason why. The purpose of therapy is not to remove suffering, but to move to a place of an enlarged consciousness where you can hold opposing polarities, right? This person wasn't all good, this person wasn't all bad, but they did cause me pain, right? And to just being able to sit with that and hold that, without having to label it or judge it. So it's moving through these judgments and just being able to hold and accept painful opposites. You don't need to know how to heal. In the beginning, you just need the desire to heal. And everyone's healing journey is going to be different. And this is where self trust comes in, because your core self, your wise self, knows what you need. And so a big part of the healing journey is learning to trust that and listen to that wiser core self inside of you. So over time, you will start to develop more self trust, healthier habits, more feelings of safety and confidence, letting go of resentment, having stronger boundaries, keeping small promises to yourself, forgiving yourself, and honing your intuition. You will let go of the idea that self sacrifice is love. Um, and there's usually kind of like an awakening experience that feels like a death. It can feel like skydiving without a parachute, as you're going through this reintegration process. And it can feel very, very intense and very, very overwhelming, but it's still safe and okay. So, as you're going through this awakening process, this reintegration, it is important to pay attention to your triggers and trust them to teach you. Are you responding to your triggers, or are you reacting to your triggers? Responding looks like observing, thinking, going slow, being intentional, versus reacting, where you're just impulsively reacting to a situation. And we all have reactions we regret, and it's easy to get guilt stuck in guilt and shame about those reactions, but then you're suffering twice. Guilting and shaming ourselves is going to keep us from healing. This is going to require a lot of self-love and self-acceptance. So use your reactions as clues to show you what still needs healing. Use them as ways to look deeper, follow the root, think about what core beliefs triggered your reaction and how you can rewrite them, and then just do the next right thing. So, getting triggered isn't a bad thing. It means school is in session. Think about, when did you feel like this before? And then this time, allow yourself to fully feel it and really coach yourself through it like a loving parent would do. Okay. So, your homework is to spend the day with your inner child. Think about that sweet, innocent, sad, wounded part of you, and spend the day with them. Do whatever they want to do. Allow yourself to be childlike and be innocent and be silly, and just spend the day doing whatever your inner child wants to do. That's everything I have for today. Thanks, everybody. If you want more information, links are in the description.